For about 20 years, Egypt was ruled by a king who was a woman, not a queen, a king. She took the throne name, the crown, the full royal titles, and the ceremonial beard that came with the office, and the country ran normally. Then, roughly 2 decades after she died, somebody went around Egypt with a chisel and took her out of it. Her name cut out of the stone, her face recut into somebody else's, her statues broken into pieces and buried in a pit. The man everybody blames had been sitting on the throne alone for 20 years by the time it started, doing nothing about it. Which is the problem with the story everybody tells. Start with the part that is completely ordinary. Around 1479 BC, the pharaoh Thutmose II died. His heir was Thutmose III, a small boy, young enough that he could not rule. So the boy's stepmother took over as regent, holding the throne on his behalf until he was old enough to sit on it. Egypt had done this before. There is nothing strange here at all. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she was about as royal as it was possible to be. Daughter of one pharaoh, wife of the next, and God's wife of Amun, which was the most senior religious office a woman could hold and came with land, income, and staff of its own. The regency was not a seizure, it was the obvious appointment. And what she wanted from that point onward was simply to keep holding what she was already holding. Thutmose III was a small child with the best claim in Egypt and the one asset nobody else in this story had: time. Behind both of them stood the machinery of the Egyptian state, the priesthoods, the treasury, the officials who actually ran the country. Their want is the simplest of all: continuity. Egypt had a procedure for a dead king with a small son. It did not have a procedure for what happened next. Because somewhere around year 7, Hatshepsut stopped being a regent. She took the full royal titulary, the 5 names, the whole formal apparatus of kingship. She took a throne name, Matkare. She was shown in the crowns, holding the crook and the flail, wearing the pleated kilt and the ceremonial beard that every Egyptian king wore in formal art. She did not become a queen regnant or a female pharaoh, or any of the careful compromise phrases we reach for now. In the official language of her own country, she became king, and this is where nearly every popular version of this story goes wrong, so it is worth being slow about it. The beard was not a disguise. Nobody in Egypt was being fooled. This was a country ruled by a woman that its entire court had known since she was a child, in a palace where her identity was not a secret from anybody. The beard was a piece of regalia, false, tied on, worn by kings who could grow perfectly good beards of their own because it belonged to the office rather than to the man. King was a job with a costume. She put on the costume. And you can tell that Egypt was not pretending because of the grammar. Her inscriptions give her the full titles of a king, and in places they keep the feminine forms. The female pronoun sitting inside the male office, sometimes in the same line of text. Nobody was hiding anything. They were doing something more interesting than hiding. They were fitting a real person into a formal role that had never had to accommodate one like her, and not always bothering to smooth over the join. And then she ruled for about 2 decades. This is not a caretaker reign. It is one of the great building programs of Egyptian history. Obelisks at Karnak, one of which is still standing. Chapels, restorations, and quarrying on a scale that requires a functioning state and a full treasury. And the terraced temple at Deir el-Bahari, cut into the cliff face in 3 long colonnaded levels, a building that looks, 3,500 years later, oddly modern. On its walls is the expedition to Punt, a trading voyage to somewhere on the Red Sea coast or the Horn of Africa. The location is still argued about, carved in unusual detail. The ships, the cargo, incense trees dug up and carried aboard, with their root balls wrapped to be replanted in Egypt. It is the best documented trade mission of the ancient world. It is also carved on her own temple by her own craftsmen saying that she did it. That is not nothing. But it is not neutral either, and it is worth saying so out loud. Running much of this was a man called Senenmut, who came from an ordinary family and ended up holding dozens of titles, including tutor to the king's daughter. Inside her temple, in places the public would never see, there are more than 20 small images of him. Ancient graffiti and modern speculation have both made the obvious suggestion about the two of them. The gossip is not evidence. The hidden images are evidence of something, just not necessarily of that. Meanwhile, the boy was growing up. And here, you need to hold two things at once because everything that comes later depends on it. Thutmose III was trained as a soldier. He was given command. He led Egyptian troops during her reign as an adult at the head of an army, which is to say that she armed him and sent him out, and he did not revolt. No coup, no purge, no exile, no imprisonment, no convenient accident. A competent adult general spending years at the head of an army in the reign of a king he is supposed to have hated. She died around 1458 BC, after roughly 22 years as king. Thutmose III became sole ruler at last, in his 30s, and nothing happened. He ruled alone for decades and became the most successful military pharaoh Egypt ever had. Campaign after campaign into Syria and beyond, the largest empire the country would ever hold. And through all of it, her monuments stood. Her name stayed on them. Her obelisks stayed up. Her temple stayed open for about 20 years. Then late in his reign, it started. Her cartouches, the oval rings drawn around a royal name, were chiseled out of the stone. Her figure was recut into somebody else, usually her father or her husband. Her statues were pulled down, deliberately broken up, and dumped in a pit near her own temple, where archaeologists found the pieces in the 1920s and 30s and slowly put them back together. Now the story everybody tells. Resentful stepson. Decades of being kept from his own throne by his father's widow. And when he finally has the power and she is safely dead, revenge with a chisel, it is dramatic. It is in a lot of older books. It is almost certainly wrong. Two things kill it. The first is the timing. The erasure begins late, not at her death, not at his accession, but roughly 20 years into his sole rule. A man taking revenge does not wait 20 years. Revenge is not a project you get around to in middle age. The second is that it is selective. It is not thorough. Images survive untouched. And the pattern of what was attacked tracks something specific, the material that presented her as king. Not every trace of a woman, the record of a woman holding the office, which points at something colder than hatred, and this is the reading most historians now take. A reading, not a proof. He was not erasing a person. He was editing a list. Egyptian kingship ran on an official sequence, father to son, carved into king lists and recited in temples. Hatshepsut sat inside that sequence as an anomaly. Take her out and the line reads, father, son, son. Clean, ordinary, and with no precedent standing in it. And he had a son of his own to think about, which is, in its way, worse than hatred. A person can be hated back. Hatred at least concedes that somebody mattered enough to hate. This is administration. Somebody looked at a 22-year reign and decided that it was a formatting problem. But be careful here because this is inference and not testimony. We do not have his reasons in his own words. Nobody wrote down why. What we have is chisel marks and dates, and a line drawn between them by people 3,000 years later. It is the best available explanation. It is not a confession. And anybody who tells you they know what he was thinking has gone past the evidence. And it did not work. The temple at Deir el-Bahari is still there. The obelisk at Karnak is still standing. The statues that were smashed and buried were dug up, matched, and reassembled, and they stand in museums now with the break lines still visible. The erasure failed, not because anybody resisted it, but because it was incomplete. Somebody stopped or ran out of interest or died. She was not written out because a woman ruled Egypt. She was written out because a woman ruled Egypt well for 22 years and left behind a temple and an obelisk and a working empire. That is what makes a precedent rather than an embarrassment. The chisel was never really aimed at her. She was already dead. It was aimed at everybody who might come afterward and point at her name. Somebody went to a great deal of trouble to make sure that nobody would remember her name. We know her name.